Patrick, the kind medic, had been the first to advise Anya to find someone who could keep an eye on Fred in the coming days, to make sure he wasn't left alone when she couldn't be there. Though his words were calm and kindly meant, they had struck her like a command she neither could nor wished to ignore. From that moment on, Anya decided not to let Fred out of her sight, at least not for as long as visiting hours allowed. That morning, after dropping Kai and Matilda off at school, she found herself in the hospital cafeteria, where the scent of pastries and roasted coffee mingled with the sharp trace of disinfectant wafting from the corridors. She stood in line, fingers trembling slightly, her gaze searching for something steady to rest upon, but finding none. Nervously, she bit her lower lip, knowing that no drink, not even the hottest, darkest one, could quiet the storm that churned inside her. What stirred in her wasn't mere nervousness, but a restless, primal pulse beneath her skin, an ache that could not be reasoned with or subdued. She knew she would see him soon, and that realization sent a fragile thrill through her body, one she could not hide, not even from herself. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" asked the young woman behind the counter, her practiced cafe smile perfectly balanced, neither too warm nor too distant, just as her job required. "One hot chocolate, please. No added sugar, and if possible, with extra dark chocolate," said Anya softly, her voice calm, though her chest still throbbed with quiet turmoil. "Of course," replied the girl as she typed in the order, then looked up. "Anything else?" "No, thank you. That's all," said Anya, handing over coins to pay. But before she could set them down, a voice spoke up behind her, quiet, almost a whisper, yet sharp enough to slice through her breath. "And one mocha, please." Her heart froze, then started pounding again, as if it had just remembered its purpose. Slowly, as though walking through a dream, she turned her head. There he was, Fred, smiling that gentle, faintly mischievous smile that sent a ripple of youthful trembling through her. He was dressed in black trousers and a white shirt, clean and neat, as if the past weeks of pain and frailty had never existed. Seeing him like that, outside the confines of his hospital bed, felt almost unreal, as if a dream had slipped quietly into daylight. Without thinking, she rushed toward him and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tighter than she meant to, with a fierce urgency that startled even him. Frightened by the force of her own need, she pulled back quickly, her hands hovering near her lips, trying to hide the smile that bloomed anyway, warm and unstoppable, like spring returning. "Fred, God," she whispered, breathless. "You're walking. You're here. How do you feel?" "I'm sorry, I might have hugged you too hard." He looked down at her, his smile soft yet steady, carrying a quiet composure that disarmed her completely. "Honestly, I feel good," he said, then turned to the girl behind the counter. "One mocha, with her hot chocolate, please. You can put it on the bill for room 24. Fred Stevenson." Anya wanted to scold him, to tell him he shouldn't overdo it, that he belonged in bed. But she couldn't. She just looked at him, drinking him in with her eyes. He was here, standing, smiling, and that alone was enough to make her forget every warning and every reason. No chocolate, no drink, nothing in the world could awaken what he already stirred inside her. Every part of her body and soul was alive, trembling in his presence. "But thank you," he said softly, lowering his voice as if the words themselves weighed on him, "for being there for me." "It was nothing," she murmured, trying to downplay her devotion. Fred shook his head with a faintly teasing grin. "Don't lie. I know it wasn't easy, and it still isn't." Anya averted her gaze, shrugging as if she could shake off the weight that hung between them. "No, it's not easy, I admit that. But you're here. You're recovering. Just tell me, who let you out of your room?" Fred laughed and shrugged, like a child confessing a harmless mischief. "Truth is, I didn't exactly ask." He started to sit, but Anya caught him by the collar and pulled him back, her eyes warning him she wouldn't tolerate any of his little rebellions. "I don't know what you think you're doing, mister," she said through a half smile, "but I'm not letting you out of my sight. We're going back to your room now." Fred leaned closer, his voice low and rough. "Sounds like an order I'll gladly obey." Almost without realizing it, she brushed his hair from his forehead. He took the cups and led her down the hallway. Her heart beat faster with every step, as if every corridor they walked erased a bit of the distance that had kept them apart for so long. Her fingers gazed the fabric along his back, careful not to touch the bandages, and beneath her touch, she felt warmth, steady and undeniable. He lifted his hand and intertwined his fingers with hers, firm yet gentle, like a vow made without words. When they reached his room, they set the cups down on the bedside table. Then he drew her close, gently, but with a strength that made her knees weaken, holding her as if the world beyond that moment no longer existed. Anya melted into his embrace. Her thoughts, her worries, and the noise of everything outside faded. Only truth remained. She was happy. Not theoretically, not in some imagined way, but fully, deeply, irrevocably happy. She was with him, and that was enough. Later, she would perhaps try to suppress that truth, to rationalize her moment of weakness, to convince herself that she didn't want him, didn't need him, not in the way one needs air or blood. But now, as their lips found and claimed each other, as silence turned into a passionate prayer, Anya allowed herself to forget. Her lips trailed down his neck, her mind dissolving into nothing, until the sharp ring of a phone sliced through the air. She pulled back, eyes apologetic, and reached for the device. A strange number flickered on the screen. She hesitated for a moment, then firmly pressed decline, switched the phone off, and placed it on the table beside the bed. She turned back to Fred, took his hand, and drew him to her. He looked at her, surprised, as if to speak, but she silenced him with a kiss, soft yet certain. "Today is our day," she whispered with a smile, "and no one's going to ruin it." "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice trembling somewhere between doubt and hope. "More sure than I've ever been," she replied. He wrapped his arms around her, and she rested her head on his shoulder. Both of them knew that the peace they held might not last, but for now, it was theirs. One day, 1 hour, 1 heartbeat was enough, because they had each other exactly as they were always meant to. Fred guided her toward the bed with a slowness that felt deliberate, almost reverent, as though each movement were something he wanted to engrave into memory. Anya drew him closer through a quiet laugh, her lips brushing his neck, while his hand slid down her waist to find the zipper of her dress. When he unfastened it, his touch moved beneath the fabric with a kind of sacred awe, tracing her skin as if afraid to break the spell that bound them. His lips descended along her body, catching each sigh, each shiver, as though they were fragments of light he needed to survive. Soon, their clothes were forgotten, discarded remnants of restraint, and what remained between them was breath and skin, and the quiet, irresistible hunger to belong to one another completely. She touched him gently, exploring, as though each line of his body contained a secret waiting to be understood. Her fingers lingered over the places where bandages hid the evidence of pain, tracing the tenderness that lay beneath. His body trembled under her hands, and a soft sound escaped his throat, half sigh, half surrender. In that instant, a long-buried fire stirred within her, a hunger she had spent years denying. It was the desire, not merely to be touched, but to be seen, to be known, not as someone who had endured, but as a woman who could still burn. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, hesitation dissolved. There was no question, no boundary left standing between them, only longing, raw and wordless, a vow made in silence. In that meeting of eyes and skin, they seemed to rediscover the missing pieces of themselves, the reason they had both kept afloat for so long. Their bodies came together in a rhythm that both ached and healed, a kind of sweet suffering where time itself lost its edges and the heart found its pulse in another's breath. Anya's quiet cry broke the air, more a prayer than a sound, as she felt him, wholly, in every nerve, in every flicker of her pulse. For the first time in years, she no longer felt the need to hide her thoughts or silence her feelings. She could finally surrender. That day, there were no mistakes, only a fragile kind of mercy, as though time itself had paused to let them exist unjudged, unbroken. When Fred turned her toward him and their eyes met, hazel meeting deep ocean, Anya saw in him everything she had never dared to say aloud. A love that had endured silence and distance, a passion that had smoldered beneath ash only to burst into flame once more. There was no doubt left in his gaze, no what if, only the fierce simplicity of now and us. She reached for his hair, the same honey-colored hair she had dreamt of so often, and drew him closer, kissing him with the desperation of someone who had waited far too long to begin again. Her kiss was both confession and absolution, promise and release, and as she breathed him in, she felt her heart resume its full rhythm, blood rushing faster, louder, certain. She wished it could last forever, I need you, she whispered, her voice hoarse with truth, with longing, so fragile that speaking more might shatter the illusion. Fred's eyes darkened at her words, and whatever trace of restraint had held him slipped away like smoke through open hands. He couldn't refuse her. He couldn't resist the voice that called him home. Her need, unhidden and unguarded, pulled him beyond reason, and he surrendered, utterly, without thought of return. His body reached for hers, his soul for her touch, because no one had ever reached him the way Anya did. Only with her did he feel alive again, no longer the sum of his scars, but something whole. Every movement between them was a heartbeat, every silence a confession, every glance a promise renewed. And for the first time in years, they were happy, truly, irrevocably happy, as if everything that had come before was nothing more than a pale shadow, a fading echo from another life. Fred could not take his eyes off her. He didn't want to. It would have felt like blasphemy to look away from what they had built in that fleeting eternity. Her beauty was unbearable in its truth, too real, too consuming, and his gaze traced every line of her face, every trembling breath, as if to assure himself she was real and not a dream destined to dissolve at dawn. And as he looked at her, he remembered everything they had shared, the sorrow, the laughter, the long nights between, and knew that this, here, now, was one of the most beautiful moments of his life. Perhaps it could not be compared to the first confession of love, nor to the countless nights she had whispered it again and again. But he knew this one would remain engraved within him forever, because it was proof that love, when it survives the storm, emerges stronger than anything. Frederick sat gently and brushed aside a loose strand of hair that had fallen across her forehead as she slept. He lingered there for a moment, watching her in silence, absorbing every detail of her peaceful face. In that instant, as she breathed in slow, steady rhythm, she seemed almost untouchably pure, free from every wound and every shadow of sorrow. He felt an irresistible desire to preserve her like that forever, untouched by the storms that had torn their lives apart. In his chest, a question smoldered. Was it too much to ask of life that she, of all people, remain untouched, that the world not find another way to break her? Yet as he looked at the calm on her face, he knew the answer could only ever be a firm no. If she stayed by his side, if he could wake to this sight every day, that would be enough. He could live the rest of his life within that simple happiness and regret nothing. Anya stirred softly and opened her eyes, still half wrapped in the warmth of sleep, her thoughts lingering somewhere between reality and the gentle refuge of dreams. She could not remember the last time she had awakened feeling so complete, as though her heart had finally found its rightful place. She stretched, and then her fingers brushed against something solid, something unexpected, in the space where she had long grown used to being alone. She froze, afraid to look, afraid that if she turned too quickly, the truth might vanish. Slowly, she turned her head. Frederick's there, smiling at her quietly and warmly, almost playfully. Her breath caught. For a moment she trembled, overcome by disbelief, and had to hold her breath to convince herself this wasn't another dream. But it wasn't. It was him. She smiled back, powerless against the feeling that swelled inside her like a fragile bubble of safety and wholeness, as if the walls around them contained their entire world and nothing outside could reach them. But the joy lasted only a heartbeat before her expression shifted. A flicker of doubt clouded her eyes. The thought struck her like a blade. What if he saw Rosalie in her? What if his mind had tricked him into finding the ghost of the woman he had lost in Anya's face? Could he truly have moved on, or was this moment just an echo of another love? Earlier that day, when they had sought shelter in each other, she hadn't asked herself those questions. But now uncertainty crept back, merciless and sharp. Rosalie and Fred had been a family, and with Matilda, the picture had been whole and sacred. And she was an intruder. She should get up, leave, and retreat before it became harder to breathe. But she couldn't move, not while his lips still searched for hers. If nothing else, she could at least wait until he stopped kissing her. It would feel unjust to interrupt him before then, because in those kisses, she found her peace, her strength, her meaning. When he finally drew back, she looked at him, his smile still there, steady and unshaken, sending shivers down her spine, like an invisible hand tracing the lines of her body. "Don't for a second think I regret what happened between us, Anya," he whispered, his eyes shining with something she had longed to see. His voice was quiet, but in that silence she heard everything, and she knew that no doubt could deceive her again. Not for a moment, not even the smallest part of me. Then he lay down beside her and kissed her shoulder, leaving a kiss like a seal upon her skin, gentle and calm, yet powerful enough to feel like a promise. Those words scattered her fear that she had taken someone else's place in his mind, and gratitude filled her so deeply she wasn't sure she could survive if the truth had been otherwise. If she had awakened to hear him call another name, her heart would have shattered into pieces beyond repair. Instead, she pressed closer to him, resting her head against his shoulder, soaking in the warmth of his embrace. In those quiet moments, as she listened to the rhythm of his heartbeat through his chest, everything else faded away. This simplicity was all she had ever needed. Simple meant safe. Simple meant they didn't have to fight the world, at least not while they had this small sanctuary. "Neither do I," she whispered, her words carrying the soft weight of a prayer. "Good," he murmured, his smile deepening as he lifted a hand to run his fingers through her hair, then let his palm drift slowly down her arm until it found her hand. His thumb brushed over her skin in quiet, rhythmic motion, and his eyes never left her face, as if he wanted to memorize every nuance of her expression. She sighed softly, barely audible, but enough for him to hear. And in that sigh, Fred found yet another reason to smile, realizing that it was one of those small, fleeting things that kept drawing him deeper into his love for her. Who would have thought that Anya, of all people, would become the woman to reshape him, to give him the strength to become someone better? Balanced on the edge of bliss, overwhelmed by the feeling that made him helpless, he knew he could no longer lie to himself. He couldn't let her go. Even if he wanted to, his hand wouldn't open, his heart wouldn't yield, because losing Anya would mean losing a part of himself. In that moment, he made his decision that this was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. But just as he opened his mouth to tell her, she stopped him with words that cut through him like a knife. "After today, this can never happen again." Her voice was calm, stripped of emotion, and Fred felt his blood turn to ice. "Anya," he whispered hoarsely, his voice carrying the weight of despair. She drew in a deep breath, sat up against the headboard, and spoke without looking at him. "Can't keep doing this to ourselves, Fred," she said, the words breaking from her like surrender. "It only makes us hope, and we can't afford to hope anymore." He saw the lostness in her eyes, the trace of something she had carried for far too long. "What if I don't want to let you go?" he asked, ready to fight, to convince her, to prove that they were meant for each other, that the world, with all its obstacles, could not stand between them. "You'll have to," she said softly but firmly, as if she was placing his love on trial. "You have a child, Fred. She has to come first." And the thought of Matilda fell between them like a blade, severing everything he felt. "But Anya, he began, desperate to explain, to convince her that love and duty didn't have to be opposites. "No, Fred." Her words cut him off. "I can't hear that. Not now." Her voice trembled, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I wish I could smile every time you say it, that I could shout it to the world, but every time I hear it, another piece of my already broken heart shatters." She looked at him then, searching his eyes for comfort she knew she wouldn't find. "We have to be strong and face a world where, for now, there is no us." Fred exhaled slowly and stepped toward her, placing his hands on her shoulders. He hesitated for a heartbeat, unsure whether he had the right to pull her closer, but he got his answer when she fell into his arms. He wrapped her tightly, fighting to keep his composure. "I can't bear to lose you," he confessed, his voice heavy with pain. "Neither can I, Fred," she whispered, and he felt her breath against his skin as she struggled to stay composed. Then he felt a warm trace against his chest and realized her strength had finally given way. Her tears were flowing freely now. He bowed his head and pressed a kiss to the crown of her hair, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. Hadn't they been happy just moments ago, whole, fulfilled, believing they had finally found peace? Now, as his hand moved slowly up and down her back, all he could do was hope that she understood what words could not say, that he was there, that she wasn't alone, that he would not let go, not yet. "But what good is it?" she asked quietly, her voice calm yet broken. "To hold on to each other if we'll never have our own happy ending?" There was no challenge in her tone, no anger, only a quiet plea, almost childlike, that he might somehow find words strong enough to undo what she already knew. "We have to face reality, Fred. Maybe we believe we belong together. Maybe we feel it in every part of our bodies and souls. But I can't come closer to you, not until your daughter accepts me." She lowered her gaze, her voice breaking with exhaustion, as though simply looking at him might shatter what little strength she had left. Fred didn't want to hear those words, much less repeat them. They were a knife, one that didn't kill but stayed buried deep, a constant reminder of a wound that would never heal. His heart wanted to shout, to fight, to deny everything she had said, But a part of him, that old, quiet, steadfast part, knew she was right. However unfair it felt, the truth was merciless and simple. "You're right," he whispered, and the words tore at his throat as they left him, every syllable dragging a piece of him along, leaving behind a trail of pain and quiet defeat. "We should get dressed, and I should probably go," she said, her voice trembling, the sentence sounding both like a suggestion and a verdict. "Yes," he answered, with the tone of a lost child who had let go of the hand guiding him through the crowd and no longer knew which way to turn. "All right." Every word felt wrong, too little, too hollow for what he wanted to say. It killed him to turn his back to her while pulling on his clothes. Every movement and every piece of fabric against his skin felt like another nail sealing the coffin of a hope he was desperate to keep alive. The clothes were ordinary, meaningless, yet in that moment they felt like armor. Armor that separated him from her, a wall rising between them, one he knew he would come to hate. Maybe he would burn them when he got home, just to rid himself of her scent. But how could he wash her from his skin and from his soul? He would carry her forever, marked by her, as if she had tattooed herself upon his heart, where no eye could see, but where the pain would never fade. When he turned around, he saw her slipping on her dress, her movements graceful yet achingly detached, as if dressing herself were a way to close the door on everything that had just happened. He stepped closer to the bed, circled around it, and stopped beside her, unable to look away. He feared that if he blinked, her image might dissolve into shadow. She lifted her eyes and met his gaze, and for a moment he wished time would stop, that the door would lock, that the outside world would disappear, leaving them trapped in this single, endless moment. "Don't think for a second that I'll ever give up on you. You'll have me, always," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Which part of you?" she asked, not with cynicism or defiance, but with a quiet tenderness, as though she simply needed to know if she still existed in his world. "The most important one." "I can live with that," she whispered, and her smile was faint and fragile, more like a wound than a gesture of joy. "You know I'll always be yours. But we can't keep doing this, not when our lives no longer belong only to us. Our children must come first." She lifted a hand, wanting to touch him, but stopped herself at the last second, as though even the smallest contact might destroy what little strength she had left. She nodded once, turned, and started toward the door. "Anya, wait!" His voice broke through the silence like a cry, and he rushed after her, catching the door before she could open it fully. His hands trembled, his heart pounded, as if it wanted to burst free from his chest. When he caught her hand, it was as though he was clinging to the last fragment of the world he still had. Just wait," he whispered, his eyes burning as they searched hers. "Let me look at you once more. I need to remember how blue your eyes are, how beautiful your soul is. I need to take it all in, all the things people pass by too easily, the things they don't see until it's too late. Give me that. Give me one last happy memory. Give me one last kiss." Anya nodded, powerless to refuse, because her heart longed for the same thing. She wanted to keep every trace of him, every touch, every breath, every tiny thing that made her feel alive, something to hold on to during the dark nights that awaited her. She didn't want their farewell to taste like sorrow. She wanted it to be a crown, a final song, a proof that they had existed and that they had loved. His lips found hers, and she decided she wouldn't cry. She refused to let sadness taint what could have been there forever. She melted into him, pressed her whole body against his, seeking safety in what she was already losing. If this was their last kiss, it would be the most beautiful one. Her lips parted, asking for passage, and when Fred granted it, they merged even closer, like two final notes before silence. Their tongues moved in harmony, tender yet desperate, as though they were trying to make up for all the lost time, to say all the words they never had the courage to speak. They breathed each other in, as if oxygen no longer mattered, only this moment did. When they finally parted, breathless, eyes blurred with tears they refused to shed, both knew this was their goodbye. They didn't need words. The kiss had already said everything. Several minutes passed before either could speak, but their promises were already spent. All that remained was to part. "So, I suppose we should," he began, but his voice faltered, the words too weak to contain the weight of reality. "Yes," she said softly, almost inaudibly. It was all she could manage. Time had turned into their cruelest enemy. When she opened the door and stepped outside, she felt his hand slip into hers. She turned to see that same smile, the gentle, lazy one he always used to calm her, to say that everything would somehow be all right. She knew he was bleeding inside, but she squeezed his hand tighter, determined to walk a few more steps beside him. If this was the end, it would last one heartbeat longer, if only to kill them both. Fred's mind was an avalanche. Thoughts crashed and collided, roaring all at once, and all he wanted was peace, to breathe. But he couldn't. His soul was suffocating. Darkness called to him, tempting in its stillness, because there he wouldn't have to feel. But how could he ever leave her? She was his heir, his world and his future.